Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy to see you here. Happy to have Father Tom again. I can't wait to see the recording already for next week, since I'll miss it. But thrilled to have you here. And as always, looking forward to a good session. And I also want to let you know if you have suggestions for our spring time with Father Tom. Initially we talked about doing a look at the creed and kind of looking at what I think the history of the Nicene Creed. Was that it, Father Tom? I think that was your suggestion.
There's material on the creed that goes right up to the present day.
Ooh, good. Sounds good.
It has ecumenical significance.
Perfect. All right. Well, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Father Tom. And the crowd roars.
This is the prayer for the synod. We come before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather together in your name. With you alone to guide us, make yourself at home in our hearts. Teach us the way we must go and how we are to pursue it. Let us find in you our unity as we journey together to the fullness of life. Help us to walk in the light of your wisdom as we seek to do good in the world. All this we ask of you, who are at work in everyone, everywhere, and all the time, your Holy Spirit living deep within us, forever and ever. Amen. Well, I sort of have a problem. We have more material than we can possibly cover this week and next week. So maybe sometime in the future we can have a supplemental session, or maybe when we meet in the spring, maybe have 3 sessions on the creed and 1 more session on this, but we can talk about that as to whatever is your desire. Sometimes when you're talking about nationalism and Christian nationalism, people are somewhat baffled at why do you suddenly start talking about racism. And remember, one of the definitions of nationalism is that nationalism is racism with a flag. In other words, you find reactionary groups that take over the symbols of country and the symbols of religion, and they literally hide behind it. So this week and next week are really on racism. Today, more precisely on how racism was an essential part of the development of the United States. And then next week, we'll do some concluding remarks on racism, and then what does it mean to be an anti-racist, and why is that term being used, and what does it mean? But as a way to talk about nationalism, I'd like to share with you 2 prayers from the Missal and the Sacramentary that sort of illustrate how subtle the issues of nationalism might be. Now remember, we were concerned about Christian nationalism, but that's not the only kind of nationalism you can have. You can have Hindu nationalism, Buddhist nationalism, whatever religion you have, you can look at it nationalistically. Remember, it's important not to confuse patriotism with nationalism. Nationalism is when you believe that one group defines the nation. Patriotism is when people have devotion to their country, not to the exclusion of the welfare of other people. So nationalism carries with it a sense of superiority over others, where patriotism may carry with it a sense of contribution to everyone else. Now, sometimes these categories are subtle. And people that may have nationalist tendencies, like racist tendencies, may not identify as such. They may identify the exact opposite and be surprised that some of their behavior is nationalistic or some of their behavior is racist. You certainly see this in relationship of men to women. For the longest time in the United States in particular, men have been forced to role play a certain stereotype, which is now being deemed to be more and more insensitive to women, but also is stereotypical of men. So, for example, when I was in grade school and high school in Western Pennsylvania, it was automatically assumed that if you were a boy or a man, that you loved guns, went hunting, did fishing, and played sports. Well, I don't know the difference between a basketball and a football, and I don't want to know. Because I'm from Pittsburgh, PA, you have to be a Steelers fan. Okay, I'll go along with that. But I don't know at all what the line of spinach is, and I think it has some other term. So therefore, you can't be a man. Men don't cry, men don't do this, and real men treat women a certain way. They dominate. That's why in the liberation movement of women, not only are women being set free from the oppressive tendencies of a certain decrepit definition of masculinity, but men are being set free from stereotypes of men. So this is what we mean when we say things are systemic or interrelated, or that they're intersectional. Because sometimes you might not even know it. Something that drives me out of my mind is I walk into a restaurant, there'll be 4 women and 2 men. The waitress will come over and say, "How are you guys doing?" There's only 2 guys here. Would you walk up to a table of 5 men and 3 women and say, "How are you girls doing?" It's subtle how this is done. The way many weddings are performed. The bride comes down the aisle with her father. Suddenly she has no mother. The groom comes out of the closet. Why doesn't the groom come down the aisle with his parents or significant people, and the bride come down the aisle with her parents or significant people? Because it's based on the idea that the 2 fathers have gotten together and have found a bride for the male. And how easily we go along with this stuff. Let's look at Thanksgiving in the Old Translation. This is the preface prayer that introduces the Eucharistic prayer. It comes after "The Lord be with you, lift up your spirit, we give thanks to the Lord." Father, we do well to join all creation in heaven and on earth in praising you, our mighty God, through Jesus Christ. You made us in your own image and likeness and set us over all creation. Once you chose a people and gave them a destiny, and when you brought them out of bondage to freedom, they carried with them the promise that all people should be set free. What the prophets pledged was fulfilled through Jesus. It has come to pass in every generation for all people who believe in Jesus by his death and resurrection that he gave them freedom in his spirit. It happened to our fathers who came to this land, this country, as if out of a desert, into a place of promise and hope. So the prayer is emphasizing the idea that the fathers who came to this country came as if they were the Israelites coming out of Egypt. They came to this place with the promise of hope. Notice there's zero reference to the murder, the genocide, and the taking over that coming to this land meant. Here's the new translation. It is truly right that we should give you thanks and praise, O Holy One, through Christ our Lord. You have entrusted to us the great gift of freedom, a gift that calls forth responsibility and commitment to the truth that everyone has a fundamental right of dignity before you. And that's the prayer for Thanksgiving in the current prayer form. Notice how it affirms the dignity of all people. The way we pray and how we pray is often indicative of what it is that we believe. And we pray in at least two ways. We pray as individuals and we pray as a community. And our community prayer oftentimes must be revisited so that we can reset the gears or the heart once more to make sure that our piety, our devotion, and our love is inclusive of all people and not endangerment to all people. So much is being done in the contemporary church in order to address these issues of racism, sexism, and the potential for genocide that's based on the sense of nationalistic superiority. On the very, very first page of the notes you have today, you have some descriptions of how racism works or what constitutes racism. A belief in the innate inferiority of a racial group. One of the things that you do is to say that a particular group of people either has a superior tendency. So, for example, people from the Far East are remarkably intelligent. Therefore, if you meet somebody from the Far East who's not remarkably intelligent, that opens the door for ridicule, comparison, and put down. An animus directed at someone because of the person's racial identity. Denying equal treatment to a racial group. You see in the United States that from the time of Reconstruction, there have always been issues with Jim Crow laws, which are laws to make life miserable for people of color. Any action, law, or policy or institution that disproportionately harms a racial group. Even soldiers in the army, as late as World War II, could have served in divisions that were segregated. When they came back home, there was much racial discrimination in various GI bills as to who could have what benefits. And the only thing we can discern is that this was based on the skin color of a person. Remember, too, that in racist language and racist behavior, racism can be internalized by the victimized group. You see this with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people who may internalize a self-hatred because of what they were taught, the names they were called, and the categories that they're put in. Some people can believe that they're defective. Some people can believe that they're failed. In my career, I have met people of color who believed that they were of secondary worth to white people. They've read the Bible that way, that the dominant group are white people and that they had to learn their role in life. And a few months ago, I was talking with a young gay man who said, Father, I'm gay. There's nothing I can do about it. And I know I'm damned by God and hated by the church. So when people try to say that this is free speech or it's political, it's actually sociological and psychological, and it's detrimental. You may have had the experience that in your family system, you may have had somebody whose orientation was different than other people's orientation, and they were literally buried alive inside a family that was attempting to be a loving family. Prejudging members of a racial group or failing to treat them as individuals. Oftentimes, when we meet minority people, so to speak, we tend to meet what they look like, what their skin color might be. Again, this mixes up because it's not just simply along racial lines. I remember this is 40 years ago, I had to have some very serious surgery. And I'm in the bed waiting for tests, and people are coming to see me. And some members of my family met up with some members of my religious community, and they walked in the room together. And I said, oh, nice to see you. I'll be with you in a minute. My doctor's just finishing up. Well, the doctor left the room, and they said, who is that doctor? I said, oh, that's the surgeon. And they said, was she the woman? I said, I know. I understood that she's a woman. And then they said, are you going to let a woman operate on you? And I said, I was actually going to let a surgeon operate on me. Should I get the janitor? He's a man. So he can put the mop down and take up a knife, and we'll have, would that be better? Well, and somebody actually said, does she have a degree? Is she really a real doctor? There's something about, well, we know she's a woman, and we know women can go to medical school, but wouldn't they be better off as general practitioners and stop there, like a little bit above a nurse? And so you have these ingrained prejudices that may even be in the toys that you find in the store. So you go to buy gifts for your children or for your niece or your nephew, and do you buy toys that reinforce the stereotypes? I often wondered how they would have reacted if my surgeon was a Black woman. Now, what does all of this have to do with nationalism? And what does all of this have to do with the development of a nation? But before we get there, beginning on page 2 of the notes that I gave you, I'd like to show you some, maybe 5 elements on how this racial issue becomes personal and can be very, very upsetting to people. Or at least see why it's upsetting. It may not be upsetting to you, because I would suspect that generally people who participate in programs like this have already done a tremendous amount of work to cross over the divides and the issues. But let's see why it is that some people get extremely upset and why you have such strong political forces that work in the United States today, if not the world, when it comes to racism. You'll hear people say, well, we're teaching people to hate white people. Now, again, I want to take you back to my own personal experience, which I already shared with you. But I wasn't white till about 1960, 62, 63. If you remember in the last presidential election, Donald Trump made a statement. He said this about immigrants. Why can't we have more people from Norway? There's something about Northern European people that are considered normal to what it is to be a citizen of the United States. Now, forget the politics. Just throw the politics out for a moment. We're talking about the language. So when it comes to these issues, as you know, Southern Europeans were not integrated into the mainstream of the United States till way late. My father, who could easily pass as a white man, was a Democrat, a Roman Catholic, and Italian. Therefore, he did not qualify for management in the United States still. He was offered a job in 1958 to move from a day laborer to sophisticated management. And he was advised to become Protestant. Don't use any Italian accents or any Italian language. And vote Republican, or at least register that way. So you begin to see, and you'll find books that do this, that whiteness is constructed. It doesn't simply refer to skin color. So you can have light skin, you can have white skin, so to speak. Actually, nobody really has white skin, but you can have the pigmentation that's acceptable and still not be a white person. You can be nullified because of what you believe. For example, in the United States, you're having rhetoric that certain people, because of their political philosophy, are the enemy and need to be eliminated. So this race issue is very, very subtle. And we'll see in part 2 of today how racism is invented and whiteness was invented. If you go back to the ancient Roman Empire, you'll notice that in the Roman Empire, that some people in highest positions of society were Black. Slavery and those kind of things did not fall along racial lines. That was invented. To let the cat out of the bag, it was invented in the 1600s in Virginia. We'll see in the state of Virginia in the 1600s how this idea of whiteness was invented and why, and what does it mean. And it's major to the development of the United States. Today, trying to address those issues and talk about those issues has caused a significant backlash. So you see, for example, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, certain people are running around saying white lives matter, and that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. Why? What is it about people who have been oppressed, or people who are being oppressed economically and politically and socially, when they stand up against that and push back, are then suddenly painted as the enemy and a detriment to the United States? You can see this happening in places like Alabama, where again, Alabama is defying the Supreme Court when it comes to the right to vote and how you would draw congressional districts. We call this white grief. People who push back against people who have been relatively successful in claiming their rights. There are certain things that the oppressing group feels. One, losing dominance. It can happen in a family, for example. If mom and dad sit down and begin to negotiate that the father is not the head of the household, but the parents work collegially. The husband, when he's with his friends, may be compared to a man who's losing his masculinity. Or the woman might be accused, well, you're really uncomfortable being a woman, so you're trying to pretend you're a man, as opposed to you're claiming your dignity. You're claiming yourself and your intelligence. In the real world, there may be situations where one or the other is the leader because of their gifts and their talents, but they learn to work together. One of the things that many people in powerful positions fear is that they're losing the dominance. Now, it's too superficial to say that they're simply losing power. They're losing identity. So in my case, I never really felt that I was a true man because I couldn't tell the difference, nor did I care what the difference was between the football and the basketball. My whole thing was, if you wanted the ball to go through the hoop, get a ladder, take the ball and put it through the hoop, and there you are. What's the problem? So there's obviously something wrong with that kid. And there's the obvious that there's something wrong with that kid went on for 18 years. After 18 years, there must be something wrong with him. You begin to have that embedded. Captain the team, his name was, I actually remember, it was Jim. I remember his last name, but we'll keep this confidential. He was one of these 6'2", perfectly built people that if he looked at a basketball, it jumped through the hoop. If he looked at a football, it scored. I mean, there wasn't anything he couldn't play. And I remember one day he and I were talking, and he said to me, I hate sports. I said, you're the football captain, you're the head of the basketball team, you're the head of everything except the cheerleaders. And all the cheerleaders want to go out with you. I hate sports. I play it because I'm expected to. It's not who I am or what I want to do. Fascinating. It's that if I ever went home and told my father that I didn't want to play football, my father would punch me in the face and say, what kind of a man are you? We have certain fears and certain identities that drive this. The second thing that happens when we talk about racism, and you hear this a lot in the political arena, it's not my fault. It may be the fault of my ancestors, but it's not my fault. I didn't do it. Abraham Heschel made a remarkable statement when he said, "Few are guilty, all are responsible." While it's not my fault, it is my responsibility. I'm walking down the street and I see somebody who's hungry and homeless. It may not be my fault that they're homeless and hungry, but it is my responsibility. I believe it's my responsibility, first of all, because I'm a human being, and second of all, because I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. You shall feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, and clothe the naked. How you do that, what you're comfortable with, may be an argument or a matter of discernment. But we can't say I have no responsibility because I'm not guilty. If you were in a supermarket and the person in front of you passed out on the floor, would you say, I don't know them, not my responsibility, not my fault? Or would you immediately call 911 and come to the rescue? The third thing you hear under so-called white grievance is, I don't see color. I see human beings. So sometimes you hear people say this, I don't see color. Well, that can be very dismissive. If you don't see that somebody is black or Chinese or Japanese, then you must have some eyesight trouble. If you don't see that somebody, a woman or a man, or identifies differently. So I don't see color. Really dismisses individuality. Remember, the goal in racism is not a relationship to a group, but a relationship to another person. And is it possible for the person to not be identified with group prejudice? So I find it fascinating that you'll hear people say, some of my best friends are black. I've never heard anybody say some of my best friends are white. Yes, we do see it, and there's not a problem if you do see it. The problem is, what do you do with the person that you see? If you see a black man, is the black man being identified by black stereotypes, or is he being met as an individual person? Number 4 is what you see really rampant in places like Florida, to rewrite the history. And these are usually people that begin the sentence with, we can't have revisionist history unless they do it. And so you rewrite the history to say things like slavery was beneficial. That is, the slavery was beneficial to slaves. You know, sometime if you ever had an argument with someone you love, the two of you can begin to debate the historical circumstances by which the disagreement came. Who said what, when, where? Who did what first? And you start arguing about the details of the history. Now, as you know, the adage among historians is that history is written by the victor. Whoever wins the battle gets to do the history. That's why history many times is not objective, it's biased. It's important to know what the bias is. So sometimes people ask me to teach church history, And then they hand me a book that was written by a Catholic. And I go, well, okay. So do you want me to do the history according to a bias? Let me investigate this author. What is the author's background and what is the object? What is the object of the history? Is it historical or apologetic? The fifth element that we find in white grievance many times is it happened to me too. I've been the object of prejudice. You hear a lot of people say that today, that they were excluded from Harvard because they're the wrong skin color and the right skin color would be to be black. It didn't happen to you too. The history of racism in the United States is the history of enslavement and genocide. So it's very, very difficult to make the comparison. And sometimes you see this in recovery efforts. When a major hurricane or something like that strikes a particular area, certain places never recover. When I taught Head Start in the city of Philadelphia, I was in the what some people would call the inner city black ghetto. And somebody said, why do you call it black? Because all ghettos are black. So, well, no, they're not, because when I lived in Pittsburgh, PA, I came from an inner city Italian ghetto. That's how it was known. It was one of several within the city. The city of Philadelphia would pull wrecked automobiles off the highway and throw them in the neighborhoods that were black. Then people would come along and say, see how those people live. So the sanitation that was given to the district called Fernlock was impeccable. But the sanitation on Ridge Avenue was hideous. Even when the city was undergoing a renaissance and redevelopment, they put the highway straight through the section of the city that was dominantly black and broke the neighborhood in half and cut it off from the developing downtown. So if you remember in the 50s and the 60s, when many of these major highways and developments went in, it was interesting to see what neighborhoods were destroyed, what neighborhoods were displaced. Takeaway I would have you understand about what we said so far, but that it's not all about power. Sometimes you see people don't want to lose their power. It's not that. It's more than that. It's the loss of identity. If I'm not dominant, then who am I? I remember talking to a couple that had issues with abuse. The wife was frequently assaulted by the husband. She resisted getting help. At one point, the man said to me, well, if I don't keep her under control and dominate her, what kind of a man is she going to think I am? And so he had this definition of himself as a man as one who dominates. And the domination would have to take place by force. You'll notice that in the history of the United States, that force against minority groups had been used unscrupulously. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons for the turnaround in the civil rights movement in the 60s was the turn of dogs, fire hoses, and police batons on the heads of Black people in the Deep South. It shocked the nation. And we'll do a little bit of exploration about that today. Now, let's turn the page here a little bit. We're on page 5 of the notes if you want to look at this. Let's go back and look at the institution of slavery within the United States. Because slavery in the United States had an awful lot to do with the formation of the nation. It's not just simply an incident in the past, it's the formation of the nation. And we're doing this now in light of the new prayer for Thanksgiving that's found in the Roman Catholic Church. That is, that the quest for dignity is the fundamental dignity of all human beings before God. So we're not going back to beat up white people. We're going back in order so that white people can get rid of that label, white people, and maybe even black people can get rid of that label, black people, and we can all start being people, whether or not we're white or black. Not that that's indifferent, but that's a starting point, because it does have something to say. For example, if you said to me, I'm white, that really doesn't get it. You would have to say to me, you come from an Italian extraction. And then you would have to say to me, you come from southern Italy. And there's a heritage there. There's a heritage that would go back to my grandfather that came to the country when he was 8 years old. Now, if you were to look at my family when they were all alive, half of them were brown-skinned because they were Italian, and half of them were light-skinned. So this issue of race is really important for us to look at because it can become the dominant way we look at people rather than meeting people. Oh, let me tell you about my grandfather, Pietro Marie. Pietro Marie came to the United States when he was 8 years old. There's a story to be told. As opposed, oh, he's Italian. Do you like spaghetti? Would you like another meatball? It's very, very important to the formation of the nation. Some people here that if we go back and look at this history, that will get depressed, will get upset. What is depressing and upsetting things here? But by knowing them, we can become aware of our history and perhaps become aware of what it is to be a person of justice as we work together for the dignity of all people. Let me take you to James Madison's place, his plantation in Virginia, Montpelier. It's not a national monument where you can go in order to see how the country was put together and how it developed. And many of the founding fathers, of course, had slaves, as many American bishops had slaves. There was a time in the history when the slave could be white or black or any color, because slaves generally occurred because they owed money to a debtor. They were indebted. So after they paid the last penny, they would then be set free. So it's important for us to keep that in mind. Let's do this little bit of work here. Then we'll go back to the 1600s and find out where African or black brown slavery in the United States came from. Digging around Madison's plantation, they found where the slave quarters are. Now it's interesting. The main house has been preserved, but the slave quarters were neglected. And that tells you something right there. Let's keep the monument that goes positive and let the rest of it disintegrate. Archaeologists digging around James Madison's slave plantation discovered an artifact, and the artifact was a smoking pipe. pipe that you would put tobacco in and go. And on the barrel of the pipe was etched the word liberty. Sometimes in the way we talk about slavery is that the slaves were these happy, stupid people who would do whatever the master told them. They were slightly more intelligent than animals, but not quite as intelligent as full-fledged human beings. The fact that we would find a pipe that was made by a person with the name Liberty in it tells us then that these were real people. And it's very, very important to us that when we talk about slaves, and we do this all the time, we talk about with the Catholics, the Jews. We use these labels as if we're talking about something. And you're really not. You heard it this morning in the congressional disgraceful hearing where somebody, traditional Catholics, extremist. What's a traditional Catholic? That's a very technical term in some areas. Somebody asked me if I was a traditional Catholic. I said, oh, yes. I said, I believe we should feed the hungry and clothe the naked. That's the time-honored gospel of the church. It's the works of mercy. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Nothing else we do makes any sense. There's no devotion, there's no liturgy, there's no belief that makes any sense if we don't feed the hungry. Yeah, I'm a traditional. Oh, that's not, I mean Latin. Well, I'm a Byzantine Catholic. We use Greek. Yeah, but I mean a real Catholic. What a real Catholic? I mean, it comes under the Pope. Well, I come under the Pope. When the archaeological evidence finds a shoe, and the shoe has etched on it David, or it finds a pipe, and the pipe has etched on it Liberty, this is an artifact that points to a very, very real person. It's important for us to realize that in the category called slave, that we're talking about very, very real people. If you want to know what it's like to be a real person, then pay attention to yourself. Imagine if you gave birth to your child and somebody came in 20 minutes after the birth, took the baby from you and gave it away and sold it. Your children are my property. If you have an 11-year-old child, now there may be times when you joked, I would like to sell him. But if the master of the house came in and took your 11-year-old son, put him in chains and led him away to be sold, how would you feel? Number two, it's important for us to know that the height of slavery in the United States by 1850, slavery was a $3 billion industry and was the engine of the U.S. economy. 80% of American exports in 1850 had been the result of slavery. While we imagine that slavery was in the South, the benefits to the economic well-being of the United States was to the whole country. It was not simply a benefit to the southern part of the country. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why we think that America developed the way it did, with a strong economic force and its prestige within the world today, is the result of slave labor, 1850. Do the math, you're not that far back in history. My grandfather was born in 1880. What subsequently happened when slaves were set free, people realized how important it was to have the cheap labor. So laws were passed that made it very, very easy for Black people to be accused of crime. It's important for us to realize number 3 on page 6. The Constitution, rooted in freedom and liberty, actually protected slavery. One of the ways it did that was that you could incarcerate people and use their incarceration as slave labor. This part of it is very, very important because you hear people today talk about reparations, which has actually taken place in Canada. Canada is in the process of doing reparations to the harm that we've done to Indigenous people. In the United States, when you start talking about reparations, you almost get craziness on the part of people, because there's still this idea that slavery was in the past. Why do you keep bringing it up? We keep bringing it up because several things have happened within the country. One is the restriction of who can live where. The GI Bill basically was a major source in white flight. It gave benefits to certain people at the detriment of other people. Black soldiers did not enjoy the same rights as other people did. Also, laws are passed and enforced such as to create a disadvantage to certain people. If you had 91 felony counts, would you be walking around free? I doubt it. So if you look at Atlanta, Georgia, the prison or the courts where Mr. Trump was indicted has many, many people who are Black who are starving to death in a flea-infested jail, which is Fulton County. As vast as Atlanta is, you can see how decrepit the court system is. The judge there just recently said there isn't a courtroom big enough to have 19 defendants. Now, in point of fact, the United States has prosecuted 109 people at the same time. But suddenly Fulton County, which can build a stadium for the Olympics in 2.5 seconds, suddenly doesn't have a courtroom big enough. And none of the people who haven't even been found guilty yet and are not even scheduled for trial because they don't have the influence and the money are not out attacking the legal system. Forget the politics. Just look at the face of it. We see this over and over and over again, that there are certain people that have privilege because of power, money, prestige, influence, and could it be skin color. If you look at the kind of laws that have been passed and how they're enforced. Several years ago, a Black man in New York City was killed for selling a cigarette. This kind of police violence that we see within the country has oftentimes been called out by the police. It is ridiculous to say only people who hate the police call this out. That would be like saying in the church that calling out the abuse of children means you hate the church. Oh, wait a minute. Some people have tried that. I've actually heard people say it's the media's fault for making a big deal out of it. On page 7, the living descendants are helping to reshape the interpretation of slavery. You know how you have this ancestry.com where you can do your ancestry? Imagine if you go back in your history and you bump into, well, my family record ceases to exist at a certain period of time because my ancestors were slaves. Many of these people are trying to retrieve what was their name, who are they, what was their history. And finally, I'd like to conclude this section by reminding you that the legacy of slavery continues in the United States. The economic benefit that came, or the economic development that came as the result of slavery still is at work within the country. It's put us in a much better position economically, but at the expense and the harm of so many people. So those perspectives are really critical. To transition to going back in history, let me take you to page 8. What I'd like to show you now is what happens when inventiveness and technology meets social ills. How the inventiveness of technology and the social ill can either go backwards or forward. But one of the things that created real consciousness in the United States. Remember, I fundamentally believe that America as a country is a country that's questioned to the liberty and freedom of all people. I think that's our history. I think we have these significant setbacks from time to time as we go forward. I believe we're in a very difficult period of time right now, but I work for, and I hope and I pray for, the liberation of all people. I think we will get past this period of time. And I think we will be the better for it. We're really suffering the backlash. And of course, the real backlash that has brought forth the nationalists and the racists was the election of a black man to the White House. As somebody said to me, how can you have a black man in the White House? That's why we call it the White House. The interesting thing about it is that the White House was built by slaves. So many of the monuments in Washington, D.C. are the result of slave labor. So the idea that in these monuments that were built, these buildings that were built by slave labor, you would have black people with authority and power is almost inconceivable to some people. So the intersection of technology and the social ill can be a breakthrough period. Look at page 8. Remember, in the mid-1800s, something developed called Kodak film, cameras, even the early days of motion picture. There was a photograph of a slave that escaped. His name was Peter. And you can see his back. This photograph ran across the United States and raised the consciousness of many, many white people to the horrors of slavery. You can see the brutality that was done to the man. So in this day of social media, of social technology and computers, you can see that we have a rising consciousness. We have, people can use these forms for oppressive purposes, but you can also use them for breakthrough. And both are happening at the same time. And that's why you see, even in many parts of the media corporation, the necessity to have an ethic. Page 12, I thought you would like to know, it's a little list of presidents and what slaves they owned. So let's take a little break, but before we take a break, any questions, any concerns, any points of view? Anything you'd like to share?
Just remember, you're free to unmute yourself. You can press the space bar and hold it, if that's an easier way for you.
So it makes no sense to say things like this. Oh, we're putting classes together to attack white people. If you identify as a white person, what does that mean? If you're white, when's the last time you did that? When's the last time you said, I'm a white person, and identify that? What would be the essential meaning? Most people I meet identify as themselves and are somewhat horrified that they're always thrown into a group. Especially when the group has associated with it stereotypical thinking. So a couple of weeks ago, I was introduced. This is Tom. He's a priest, Father Tom. And the person I was introduced to said, oh, so you take all your thoughts from Rome. I went,
Nope.
yeah, don't they tell you what to think? It was really fascinating because I felt defensive, ridiculous. Then I started to feel apologetic, like, no, so I mean, you get thrown into a category that you didn't even know you were going to be thrown into with a prejudicial remark. Oh, you're an intelligent woman. You're a woman and you're intelligent? Wow. You're a scientist? Are you sure? You're a man and you're a poet? But my favorite one is my son Jeffrey. He's 6'3", weighs 250 pounds, lifts weights and can crack rocks by doing this. What does he do? He's a first grade teacher. College professor? No, first grade. He loves little kids. They love him. Well, first grade teachers are women. The category. The category can prevent you from meeting the person. You can even meet the person and throw them in the category and not meet them. Okay, let's take a break. How long the break do you want to take, Darcy?
Let's do a 5-minute break, and we'll definitely start by 2:10. We'll have the last 20 minutes or so.
Okay, good. That'll be enough time to do the 1600. Is this making any sense?
Oh, it's great. Yeah. Very nice. Very, very good. You know, it's so interesting. I get I like the definition that you gave of racism. Typically we think of the mistreatment or mischaracterization of a group when somebody says, oh, they think they're making a compliment maybe by saying all Asians are, they're so smart. They're the ones that are in college. To me, that's just as racist, even though it's complimentary, or might in some ways elevate a group.
Standard.
Yeah, yeah. That it was mentioned more like negative, stereotypes and things like that. But I do think that just any group characterization without the individuality is potentially racist.
Women have maternal instincts and are highly sensitive people who are intuitive and think subjectively.
Yeah.
Then if you meet a woman who thinks objectively, who's not too intuitive, then so there must be something wrong.
Yes.
So you're very right. The compliment. Those Black people, they love to dance.
Yeah.
They love to dance and sing with drums.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
there's so many of those comments.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the compliment can actually be racist. That's why they're using the term anti-racist. Because it's the fact is, no matter what your goodwill happens to be, you're going to find yourself with prejudicial thinking.
Right.
The trick is to grab hold of it, to become aware of it, and because you're always working against it, even when it comes to yourself. You may have ingrained ways of thinking about yourself that are not beneficial to you.
That's good. Yeah. And I like the term that we all have prejudicial thinking. I think people can understand that and maybe even do the deeper work when they hear that, as opposed to everybody's racist.
That's right. And by and large, those things are neutral. It's what you do with them.
Right.
That they can be activated for good, they can be activated for bad, and they can be dealt with great humor. That's why you oftentimes see people in oppressed groups that have humorists who play with these issues.
Yes. They make us see. They help us see. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the liberation comes in, if you can laugh at yourself. A program that did this very well was All in the Family. Remember All in the Family?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah.
Almost every prejudicial, stereotypical thing within the society was in that show. And so you could laugh and be outraged, and you
then
could
kind of
identify.
Whoa.
Yeah. And you wonder if a program like that would even survive today.
Well, it's funny. I've heard people say that, and I think because it's so shocking, to hear some of that humor now. It seems so out of place, but I could see at its time. That was the purpose.
To me, the real key person in that show was Edith.
Oh yeah.
Edith, who was supposed to be, the dingbat, dumb, stupid woman, was the one with all of the intelligence and humanity.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good way to look at it. Yeah. Yeah, I think what laughter does is it just raises the awareness, like you said, and then we can look at it and do something.
Well, you really see a lot of racism too is in statuary. That was one of the things I'm concerned about. I didn't know if we should go into that area or not.
Right.
But how did Jesus become white?
Yeah.
And there's a process by which Jesus became white. It was a deliberate, overt thing.
Right. No, that would be interesting. And maybe, I think this idea of nationalism it was timely and needed to be talked about, but you could keep going with the racism for a long time because, as you said, statuaries, monuments, just in general, right? That, what's appropriate to keep up as a quote symbol of our country our country's history, and what's offensive and inappropriate. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating. I mean, that's showing up all over the place. Yeah. I got to thinking, Tom, after last week, I'm going to suggest to our liturgy committee that they think about on Thanksgiving Day Mass, making a statement about where our parish resides on the Maidu Indian territory. Oh, that could be really, really fit in well and raise awareness, you know, because I mentioned it, like UC Davis, every time you go to something, they talk about like graduation, they honor the land that the university resides on. And I love that. And I thought that would be so nice to do.
And Darcy, you know, they do programs at the Maidu Center over by the Roseville Maidu Park.
Yeah.
Even finding out what those are, or you know, publishing it maybe. That would be interesting too.
Yeah, honor that in some way. Yeah. Very good. And I don't know whether or not we have any parishioners that have that heritage, Maidu heritage. I don't know.
Well, you can do some research as to what tribe was in the land.
Yeah.
What nation the parish.
Yeah, it was the Maidu for sure. It's the Maidu.
Yeah, you can even maybe find a YouTube video on the people that lived there, the nation that was there, and that could be a lovely Thanksgiving presentation. It's not a matter of ruining Thanksgiving; it's a matter of elevating the consciousness, especially now with the prayer set. The prayer is absolutely gorgeous.
Very nice.
Has there ever been any thought of doing a land acknowledgement? A lot of
that's
what I'm talking about doing.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, that would, to me, that would be perfect, especially on Thanksgiving Day Mass, which is quite nice.
Do you have resources to get the land acknowledgement information? You know, where
I'll find it. But if you have it, Dan, that would be great.
If you have any trouble,
I can get it from Sierra College.
Oh, perfect.
I could get it from Sierra College because they would be doing it there. So, and I think it would be the same tribe. So, we all, my colleges, we all start our meetings. We have it in our agenda and everything, land acknowledgement. So I'm sure Sierra College does. So I can,
very nice.
I can get what they say.
Thank you.
And Father, I was just curious, you know, also bringing up things like Georgetown University, the fact that they are doing their own acknowledgement of the fact that the university was built on the sale of slaves. And there's some, you know, there's instances of, we could go Catholic specific things of acknowledgement or something also.
Yeah, we've got work to do. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So welcome back, everybody. And didn't mean to barge into your time.
The issue of the invention of whiteness. If you remember last week, a certain presidential candidate made this statement on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah in Judaism. Liberal Jews are the reason why the election was botched the last time. So the anti-Semitic racism that's in the United States is profound. The number of anti-Semitic events in the country is at an all-time high. If you remember Charlottesville a couple of years ago, the chant was, "Jews will not replace us." And you hear political people use the idea of white replacement. Black people and Jews in particular are out to replace the white race. Now, most of us may have friends that are Jewish and assume they were white. Because if you look at their skin, you don't see anything particularly different. But this would be a perfect example of people who are not considered white Jews. Now, does this mean if somebody converted to Judaism? So let's say somebody from Norway converted to Judaism. Then would you still have you see how this gets maddening? And the problem with this is, you can tell by the example that I'm using, that I can come across as I have a certain political bias. Believe me, the political bias I have has never won any election. There are certain people that I can respect more than others in the political arena, but where I stand politically has never won. So nobody needs to fear my politics. The reason why this is difficult is because it's in the news every day of the week. And they're using racist, nationalistic language. And they're using it in the name of Christianity. And the worst thing that can happen is for Christian churches to go mute. It doesn't mean that Christian churches have to endorse one candidate against another. But they have to call out the prejudice, the hatred, the animosity, and the racism that is there. This is not a speech issue, nor is it a political issue. It's an ethical issue. It's a moral issue. And Catholics in particular, by virtue of their baptism and their constant rededication of the baptism, which is the recitation of the creed, commit themselves to following Jesus in the pursuit of opening the doors. That's what's behind the synod. This causes real endangerment. Remember the massacre in Pittsburgh, PA, Tree of Life Synagogue? That's the synagogue I grew up in. That's my original community back when I was a boy. The rabbi of that synagogue used to walk me to Catholic school. I had to learn that I somehow or another was supposed to fear or hate Jews, a lesson I never learned. At my mother's funeral, a Jewish rabbi and my dear friend from the mosque, Farouk, stood next to me on either side of me as my best friends in faith. So when I hear this rhetoric and I hear this language, you're attacking people I love. You're attacking people who love me. You're attacking people who were there in one of the most difficult moments of my life. The rabbi said to me, may her memory be for a blessing. And Farouk said to me, our mother has died. Suddenly, my mother became his mother, our mother. So you have to keep humanizing this. Go back into your life. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a shopping center. And the woman had a baby. She was a white woman with a black baby. Everybody kept looking at it. She said, this is my son. His name is David. And she held him up. Now, do you need to know the story? Then meet her. But notice how we'll see something and our mind starts to roll. And that's okay. But when the mind starts to roll, you and I catch it. Is this fair? Does this make sense? Do we know that woman? Jesus said to the Pharisee, do you see this woman? The Pharisee saw the category of his offense. He didn't meet the woman. So once again, we talk about the Jews, the Catholics, the traditionalists, the conservatives. We use all these terms But inside all of these categorical terms, there are very, very real people who may not conform to the prejudice that you associate with the term. You know how they are. No, I don't. As I pointed out to you before, I have trouble trying to figure out what I think. I'm a mystery to myself. If I'm still discovering me, how did I become an expert in everybody else? On the pages around page 15, that's an odd way to put it, but pages 13 following, you have how white people were made. Let's go to Virginia and look at the laws in Virginia around 1691. Now you can see we're way back before the country was formed. And so this is in the DNA and the influences. So you can see when the American Constitution came along, it inherited much of the colonial thinking. And therefore, it seemed to me that the Constitution is best understood when we see the Constitution as a correction to colonializing nationalistic thinking. And that's why the faithful interpretation of the Constitution would move into the enhancement and the expansion of human rights, as we clearly saw when Black men were recognized as voters and women were recognized as voters. That was not in the original Constitution, but it's in the logic of the Constitution. Slavery was a vehicle that had great economic benefit. We already pointed that out to you. But the problem is, slaves could earn money, or their families could redeem them by paying off the debt. Legislatures in Virginia realized you can't do this, or it's going to destroy the economic engine of the developing country. And so they passed laws by which people of certain skin color could pay off the debt and be set free, but what we would call Black and brown people could not. In order to justify this, in order to say that one, and this is the invention of racism, that one race is superior to the other based on skin color, you then had to justify this. And the justification came, if you look at page 16 for a moment, it came by having all kinds of studies, archaeological, physiological, medical, and even psychological, to show that people who were dark-skinned, or African in particular, were defective. Now, if you remember, when President Obama was president of the United States, there was a postcard that circulated in the country in certain regions that had his two daughters, his wife, and himself sitting on the sofa, and they all looked like monkeys and apes. And that stereotype goes back into this period of time when you had to show that people who have a skin color that's brown or Black or African, brown and Black, are less than. So you can see in the first parts of the Constitution, Black people were considered 3/5 a human being. Now, erasing that from the history, as they're trying to do in Florida, does not erase it from the DNA of the country. And since the logic of the country is to move in the direction of expanding human rights, it's important to know the history. in any kind of therapy or spiritual direction that you've ever gone to, you know how crucial it is to tell the story in order to derive the insight. So the telling of these stories does not mean you hate the nation. It means quite the opposite. It means that you love the nation. But the nation had the responsibility that comes from the virtues that it articulates, that all people are created equal. Well, that's either true or it's not true. So you can see this idea of trying to associate certain races of people with less than. They're more ape than human. And so the stereotypical thing went on. Now, you saw this everywhere in even the entertainment industry. In Hollywood, for example, long before Black people were employed as actors, white people would make their skin black because we knew that Black people couldn't be actors. And so this continuing development of the defectiveness of Black people. It's what you see oftentimes when we do to gay people, where they're defective, where they're sinful, there's something wrong with them. There's something missing. They're less than, they're not all there. Remember, this was used for women. If you go back into the time of Thomas Aquinas, a woman is less than a man because a woman wasn't in the womb long enough. If the embryo would have been in the womb long enough, it would have turned into a male. Because evolution goes mineral, vegetable, animal, female, male. If you don't know this in the history, then you won't be able to interpret the doctrines at any given period of time. Now, all of this would mean then, if you're a woman, that you had to meet a stereotypical woman. You couldn't meet real women, because if you met real women, they might break the stereotype. So a lot of enforcement went on in the culture of the United States. Everything from the Mummers Parade. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can remember the date. In 1906, let's go to 1906, let's go to New York City, and let's go to the Bronx Zoo. Go to page 19. There was an exhibit in 1906 in the Bronx Zoo in New York City. Somewhere between the rhinoceros, the giraffe, the elephant, and the monkeys, there was a Black man holding a monkey. See it? He was on display with an orangutan. And this is the kind of damage that was done. You can see the similarity. If you look at this in terms of ethnic areas, there's hardly an ethnic group that you do not associate a stereotype with that's derogatory. And you yourselves may have been the victim of that. So I really invite you to pay some attention to in your life when you hit into the sexism, the ethnicism, so to speak, the prejudice of which you were the object. And imagine now if in the legal part of the society, the economic part of the society, the political part of the society, and the educational part of the society, that was being reinforced all the time. that's not just simply what happened to a few people in the country. That's what happened to the country. And the country has every right to develop. The country has every right to transcend that. So, for example, when it comes to indigenous people, would it not at least make sense to issue formal apologies to indigenous people, to make sure that we have a consistent education what the actual history was, to quit using the name Columbus and derivatives of Columbus as if it's a virtue, and perhaps to at least take all of the state parks and recognize that they belong to the indigenous people. Now, in light of where we are politically today, you can imagine the yelling and the screaming that went on, that would go on. But that's the difference between yelling and screaming and wisdom. We need to do repair work. We need to stop stereotyping people. We need to stop being complicit, either religiously, ethnically, theologically, or traditionally, in the harming of people, because it harms ourselves. Whenever you stereotype another person, you stereotype yourself. Suddenly you're not allowed to be you. You have to conform to the hatred you're being taught. And you might be able to think back into your life when someone tried to put an ideology into your head and a practice into your life that didn't go down well. You rebelled against it because you claimed your dignity, found your voice, and stood up for what is right, good, true, and beautiful. Last word is yours.
Are there any questions or comments that are rolling around in your heads and hearts? Lots to ponder, pray about, for sure.
In my experience, the idea that race and white is it's not genetic, and it's forgetting the term that's used. I think that's the hardest one. Like, people totally don't get that in my circle. Like, they really do see very substantial criteria on race, all races, and just don't see it that it's something that, you know, through our social interactions and our history, that it's been created for us. And so for a while, like filling out forms, I really was conscious in thinking about whether, you know, when they have the demographic information and they're asking about your race, trying to understand when it's advantageous to our other community members to designate race, and when it could be used and it's not advantageous, and deciding when I think that information is worth self-identifying, you know, identifying to the organization. It's not an easy one. I'm wondering how, Father Tom, you feel about that. You know, any kind of form that you fill out that has that kind of information on it, what criteria you would use, or how you feel about it just in general.
Well, it's embedded. Thank you for bringing that up. It's embedded. You can see the whole racial issue it's an artificial construct. If you took all black people and all brown people and lined them up, where would you put the limit? See, it's really kind of. I remember once when I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I worked in a black parish. At least that's what they told me. And when I got there, I said, 3/4 of these people are brown. And the administration looked at me and said, "You're brown, black, what's the difference? The black church." Okay, it's the black church. So the parish council got together and said, we have to write a mission statement. So they wrote this mission statement. St. Paul de Cross in Atlanta, Georgia parish is a Black African American church. Well, one woman jumped up and said, "I'm brown and I'm from Kentucky. I've never been to Africa and I don't want to go to Africa." So suddenly these people that 5 minutes ago were black were now brown, light brown, medium brown, dark brown, light black, medium black, mahogany, black, cold. I mean, where was the line?
Yeah.
I said, "Oh my God." When I remember when it was white, black. Now it's white. And then you got all these white people going to New Jersey out in the sun to get a tan, which makes them brown. What are we doing? So you can see how artificial the construct is. And when you start talking about it, they finally had to say, we are a loving community in Atlanta, Georgia, open to all people.
There you go.
We're desperate to find a label that would include everybody. And how about the word, well, we strive to be a loving community that welcomes everybody. And some of us are brown, and some of us are black, medium black, light black, sort of black. And then, interesting enough, the teacher lined us all up, and I was the 18th person in. And I'm saying, Tom, there's people whiter than you. I'm going like, my Southern Europeanism surfacing back up again. So I think you're right, Stan. What I do with those forms is put down other.
Yeah, it's
Or does not apply, or big enemy. I'm sorry, Dan.
I would have to say that's sometimes a disadvantage to service, though, because a lot of times those demographic information is done in order to help government aid programs to help. If you just say other, you've just done away with, let's say you live in Pittsburgh, if you say other instead of white or instead of black, you might be disadvantaging the residents of programs.
That's right. Thank you for that. That's right. Good luck with this.
I've had the problem also in my college. We have a stated preference to, not preference, but that we want to open up leadership programs to everyone, and we want to definitely get to disadvantaged groups. Unfortunately, when they say other or when they don't fill it out, I have no idea if John White is white, black, Asian, or whatever. It sometimes you need to have those identifications because it helps locate and connect available resources and available goals. I think the problem is when you have where they're getting to more by ethnic groups. You know, some of it's both black and has both maybe a black parent and a white parent, or is biracial, and those are difficult. That is the frustrating thing on how to identify in those demographic surveys.
And Dan, I have a friend who is biracial, and he did Ancestry.com, and he had always been answering that he was a black man. But after doing his ancestry, he decided really should, even though he identifies as a black man, that he should really be listing himself as white. Just based on
Everybody
that
should
ancestry.
do-
It's very complicated, quickly.
It is.
Everybody should do
See how
their,
complex this is. Good. I'm sorry.
Denton, what was that?
say, everybody should be doing their ancestry. It's amazing what you discover. We're
Yep.
all a blend of things from all over.
Yep.
By doing ancestry, Denton's wife there, I've discovered was my cousin. So you never know. Yeah, but yeah, thank you.
And that's why you can see in any of these issues, it's better for us not to try to think that there's a singular authority that knows everything. My only point here is to raise the consciousness so we can feel free to talk about these issues intelligently, because there's always an angle somewhere that you might not be. You think you're committing an act of justice this way, that then can disadvantage someone else the other way, and that's why it requires a reflective community that's wide open, so that we can talk about this above board, openly and honestly.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. God
Here.
bless everyone. Love you. Be well.
Right. And you'll see Janet next week.
Bye.
Bye.
And have a wonderful time in Ireland, Darcy.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you.
you and
Yes.
Robert, or
Thanks.
more of you.
Yeah, just
Safe
Robert
trip.
and I.